Good afternoon and welcome back. What a great lunch. I was invited to have lunch with Kate and Judith, and you're in for a treat. I just sat back and listened to the conversation over an hour downstairs, and so we're in for a big treat. So how we're going to do this is, let me introduce myself first. I'm Dan Levitt. I think I know a lot of you in the audience. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm the Executive Director of Tabor Village, and I'm also a proud member of the faculty at the Department of Gerontology here. I'm an adjunct professor. And as well, I volunteer on the Alzheimer's Society Board of BC and the International Association of Homes and Services for the Aged. Okay, so our two speakers, Kate Mancer, she's the Principal and Director of Business Development at Terra, Lumina, Life-lease Housing, and Judith Ray, President of the Mission Association of Senior Housing. So how we're going to do the format is Kate's going to get up and talk, and Kate really is, as Judith describes her, as the Canadian expert in life lease, and she'll talk about the experience in Canada. And then Judith will do a case example of a project that is about to open, and then they'll get into some of the challenges, and then we'll make sure we allow time for questions and answers. So without further ado, pass it over to Kate.
Thank you very much, Dan. And my thanks to, there she is, Gloria and Rosalind and the rest of the organizing committee for organizing this obviously extremely popular event today and tomorrow. I look forward to spending the next sort of hour with you, and Judith and I have been working together on the development of Cedar Valley Manor, which is a life-lease project in Mission over the last few years. So as Dan said, I'm going to talk a bit about life lease in general, then Judith is going to talk specifically about Cedar Valley Manor, and then we're going to talk together about some of the challenges that we've encountered and overcome. Just briefly, the full bio is in your packages, but I did want to mention a couple of things. This is the cover of a book that I wrote on seniors housing, and I'm in the process, very slowly, of writing another one. The reference, I think it's the fifth or sixth bullet point down, to V2V network, means the village-to-village network, which is the International Association of Virtual Retirement Communities. I'm going to talk a bit about our version of that as it's operating in Mission. But I certainly encourage you to get the real scoop on virtual retirement communities, or villages as they're commonly known in the U.S. Tomorrow morning, Professor Andrew Sharlock from Berkeley University, who is the academic guru of the village movement, will be here tomorrow morning. I had the honor of listening to several of Andrew's presentations at the Village to Village annual conference in St. Louis in November. And I strongly encourage you to come tomorrow and listen to him in 25 words or less, because it affects the rest of my presentation. Villages are organizations that exist to provide services to their members as they age in place. They're not places, they're organizations. It's a rapidly growing phenomenon in the U.S., as Andrew will explain tomorrow. TRU stands for Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops. And they have recently started, in conjunction with the BC Senior Living Association, a program on seniors housing management. And so the book is on the curriculum. So that's all I want to say about that. The rest of my presentation is going to be about why I believe life lease and virtual retirement communities are the missing piece of the puzzle in the continuum of seniors housing and healthcare, as we go forward in the light of three inexorable big picture forces. Judith and I were talking before lunch about talking after lunch is never a good thing because people are feeling a bit dozy. And she said, so we had to be dramatic. And so I'm going to do my best to inject a little drama into my half hour. So these are the three big picture forces. An aging population, we talked about that this morning. I'm not going to talk about that again. Slowing economic growth. You might have seen an article featuring the Bank of Montreal's chief economist, Doug Porter, just recently. And he said very recently, or he said, I quote, average growth rates will be slower. Get used to it. So average GDP growth of about 5 or 6% in the 60s. We'll be lucky to hit 2% in the 2020s. So slower economic growth, meaning fewer resources for governments to spend on everything, including seniors, housing, and healthcare. And of course, the demands of dementia on the healthcare system, the prospects of that are quite frightening. So all of that to say that we need to do things differently. And to my mind, Life-lease is one of the most promising directions we have in BC. Other provinces are way ahead of us. So you will find out as I go through my half hour that I am a bit of a well, some people would say a crazy person on the subject of Life-lease, but I am most definitely an advocate. And this list of projects on the slide, I like to call my Road to Life-lease Salvation, started in 1999 with a report called Alternate Tenure Arrangements, financed by the good folks at CMHC. And interestingly enough, one of the other 5, aside from Life-lease, was Cohousing. So that was interesting in light of today's session. So that report also, interestingly enough, was my first real exposure to seniors housing. I'd been in the housing industry all my career. And I kind of instantly fell in love with both. It was one of those things. So ever since then, that's been my life. Seniors housing and Life-lease and virtual retirement communities in particular. In 2010, Terra Housing Consultants, and I think many of you in the room know Terra, and Lumina formed Terra Lumina Life-lease to help nonprofits develop and operate life leases. So what all this means is that it took me more than a decade to start walking the walk rather than just talking the talk. Life-lease is a cross between owning and renting, as you see on the screen. It began in the prairies over 30 years ago when communities wanted to create good quality seniors housing in their communities but lacked the funds. So they came to the obvious conclusion that the one source of money they had was the people who'd be moving into the building, and that's how the whole thing started. Life-lease is a creature of the nonprofit sector in almost every part of Canada except for Alberta, where for-profit life-lease operators are also quite common. Residents provide the financing, as I pointed out, and it's important to remember that in Canada, the vast majority of seniors are homeowners. In BC, the proportion of 65-plus households who own their houses is 77%, and their average income, that's the average income of the owner households, is just under $77,000. So they do have assets, they do have reasonable incomes, although as Gloria was pointing out just before the session started, there are affordability challenges that we are all trying to deal with, and there are some ways that Life-lease can create rental housing for lower income households, and I'll talk a bit about that later. The reason Life-leases in BC use 30-year leases, actually 29 years, 364 days, is because leases under 30 years in BC don't attract property transfer tax, which is significant, as property buyers in BC know. So not having to encounter PTT is an enhancement of affordability. The exit mechanism refers to what happens when people leave. Sometimes they get 95% of their money back, which is the case in Mission with Cedar Valley Manor. Sometimes they share in any capital appreciation that might occur between the time they move in and the time they move out. Sometimes they sell for whatever the market will bear, less an administrative fee for the sponsor. So that's one of the beauties of Life-lease, is it allows nonprofit organizations to meet all kinds of different goals and objectives. I'm not going to address all these points specifically, although they will come up again during the presentation. I hope the list conveys a sense of why I'm such a strong advocate of Life-lease. The reason for the Sunshine Coast reference, and Sue Jackal, one of the well-known housing activists on the Sunshine Coast, is here this afternoon, is that sort of recent and ongoing work on the coast is suggesting that perhaps an inescapable conclusion that the only way to create new seniors housing on the coast is via the life-lease mechanism. So here's more or less a quote from one of my earlier reports. It's ironic that I couldn't actually find the quote, but it goes more or less like this, that when done well, life-lease is the perfect mechanism for harnessing the energy and resources of the nonprofit sector with the desire of seniors to live in true communities of their friends and neighbors. And we talked several times this morning about how important that friends and neighbors and living in community is. So that's an entirely true statement, although doing it well is most definitely easier said than done. Like any real estate development, life leases are complex and challenging and not for the faint of heart. So Judith will be attesting to that later. But their residents truly love them. And so lest you think I'm totally unhinged on the subject, which maybe I am, here is a quote from a report on life lease, also funded by CMHC, published in 2007. If you can't read the screen at the back, what it says is that everyone in all 15 focus groups indicated that they would purchase a life lease unit again or advise a friend to purchase. Residents indicated that they were extremely happy in their choice of housing. So life lease essentially means the best of both worlds, and I'm going to show you momentarily pictures of a number of life lease projects in BC and in the rest of Canada. These on the screen are the attributes of life lease that are very commonly mentioned by our buyers in Mission and in Vernon, where we're developing another life lease project. And interestingly enough, in both those communities, there isn't a lot of choice for people who want to downsize. One of the things we found in Mission was that downsizers in Abbotsford, which is just across the Fraser River, had twice as many choices to downsize to as people in Mission. So, of course, the inevitable happened. People from Mission wanting to downsize were leaving Mission and moving to Abbotsford. Now we've reversed that, and we hear the comment very often in Mission that they're so delighted to have something in Mission for people who want to downsize. And in addition, of course, our 42 units are freeing up 42 single detached houses in Mission for families to move into. And I think Simon Fraser had a research project underway about overhoused people. Actually, I should say 41, because one of our buyers is from Hope. So, well, you know, you might think this is a bit over the top, but as I said to myself when I was putting these slides together, that, you know, what advocates do is advocate. And I am most definitely an advocate of life lease housing. So here's some examples. Ron Pike, the CEO of Elam Village in Surrey, is up next on the agenda. So I'm not going to spend any time on this at all beyond noting that Elam is the largest life lease community in BC and is one of the largest in Canada. This is the Performing Arts Lodge in Vancouver, and it's also on the agenda, so I'm not going to talk about it either, beyond mentioning that the sale of 12 life lease units in this building was the difference between a capital shortfall and enough money to build the building. This is Legion Manor in Maple Ridge. It's one of 2 life leases that are owned and operated by the Maple Ridge Legion. The reason I chose this project out of all of the different ones that I could have chosen is because when Legion Manor and its kitty corner partner, Legion Gardens, were built 15 years ago, the driving force behind their development was the Legion's then secretary, who had a real flair for development and a true commitment for creating good quality and affordable housing for seniors in Mission. So as with everything in life, very often nonprofits and life leases need to have a true champion, and that's what the Maple Ridge Legion had in the secretary then. That's what we have fortunate to have in Mission with Judith Ray. This is Cascade Court in Abbotsford, and I just put this up on the screen so I can indicate that their waiting list is 166 households long. It can take up to 12 years to get one of the best units in Cascade Court, meaning the best view of Mount Baker. So if you want one of those units, you have to really think ahead. This is Mountain View Village in Kelowna, which is owned and operated by the Good Samaritan Society, which is affiliated with the Lutheran Church. Market housing is not a major goal of the Good Samaritan Society. Their major goal is operating funded residential care and assisted living. But occasionally it makes sense for the Good Sams to incorporate a life lease into their campuses, usually to spread land costs over an economic number of units. And that's what happened in the case of Mountain View Village, which is part of a very large campus on KLO Road in Kelowna. This is one of the 3 life leases owned by the Edmonton's Lions Club, and I just put it up because I wanted to read one of their references on their website, which is, life lease retirement homes offer mature adults who are neither tenants nor owners a stake in a community designed as a rewarding, supportive, and affordable place to live. Oh, good. You have to press that emphatically. This is another life lease that's focused on an occupation like the Performing Arts Lodge is. In this case, retired teachers. Vic Wyatt was the superintendent of schools in St. Vital, which for all the ex-Winnipeggers in the audience is a suburb of Winnipeg. When he died, he left $250,000 in his will to kickstart a housing project for retired teachers, and Vic Wyatt House is the result. It's 64 2- and 3-bedroom units, must be close to 20 years old now, and has been very successful. Now this is a very unusual combination of housing. It's a life lease, also assisted living, and also a United Church. So before this building was built, McClure United Church in Saskatoon was a church that didn't believe in the necessity of having real estate, of having a building. They were more like they would meet in schools and in restaurants and that kind of thing. But one year, the United Church in Saskatoon said, we need a building and we want you to build a building. So they decided that the best way they could go about building a United Church in Saskatoon was to also incorporate some residential housing for seniors. And so that's exactly what they did. There is a big multi-purpose space on the main floor, which functions as a multi-purpose space during the week for residents of the building. And then on Sunday mornings, the chairs come out and it gets turned into a sanctuary for the church services. So it's worked very well. One of their major stumbling blocks at the beginning was a discussion in the congregation about whether you could have a true church if you didn't have pews. And of course, you can't have pews if you're moving them back and forth all the time. They eventually decided you could have a true church without pews. So this is Shepherd Gardens in Toronto. There are a number of life-lease projects in Toronto that were encouraged by the Ontario government, who saw a lot of long-term care facilities that were aging and becoming obsolete. The Ontario government encouraged the owners and operators of those care facilities who had surplus space on their sites to develop life leases as a way of generating enough revenue to help rebuild the long-term care facilities. So there's a number of examples of this in Ontario. This one happens to be, as you can see, Shepherd Gardens in Toronto. Staywell Manor is a project in Calgary, and it is a life lease assisted living project, meaning that people moving in have the choice of paying an entrance fee up front and a lower monthly rent for their suite, their meals, their housekeeping, their laundry, or they can pay a higher monthly rent if they don't want to or they don't have that front-end entrance fee. This one is operated by a for-profit company in Calgary, but here's an example of the same kind of thing, a life lease assisted living facility that's owned and operated by a non-profit organization. It's in Steinbach, which is just south of Winnipeg. The Manitoba government participated in the development of this project by guaranteeing the financing. which is a huge advantage because financing, as Judith will be talking about later, can be an enormous challenge. This is a very interesting, well, not that the other ones aren't, but this is a long-term care facility financed on a life-lease basis. There are 2 of them in Edmonton, and there aren't any anywhere else in Canada. People buy their apartments, they're totally self-contained, and Alberta Health Services provides the care. So they were built because the health authority didn't have the capital that they needed to build needed long-term care beds. So they came to the same conclusion that people in the prairies did 30 years ago. Where can we get the money? We'll get the money from the people moving in. And that's exactly what they did. So it has been very successful. An in-depth evaluation of Laurier House is available from our good friends at CMHC. The report is called Life-lease Supportive Housing, Combining the Best Aspects of Housing and Complex Care. The conclusion of the report, and this is interesting, is that the Laurier House model successfully unbundles government-funded long-term care services from the costs of housing and support services in a way that persuaded elderly clients and their families to invest in the housing component when the care is provided. So people essentially buy their apartment, and when they move out, they get most of their money back, and in the meantime, Alberta Health Services provides the care. One of the advantages, of course, is because they're self-contained apartment units, couples can live there very, very happily. Well, maybe they're not happy, but anyway, they're together. Maybe I should rephrase that entirely. So, it seems completely inevitable to me that in light of those big picture forces we were talking about in the beginning, aging, slower economic growth, limited government resources, that more Laurier houses are bound to be developed sometime or in the future. One of the issues that they ran into was Edmonton Health Region at the Capital Health Region at the time, is that they got accused of two-tiered healthcare, even in Alberta. And the notion was that if you could afford your apartment, you got your long-term care services. If you couldn't, you're on the waiting list. And so they countered that by saying, well, this is the only way we can get the capital, we're going to go ahead and do it. So they did it. This is Cedar Valley Manor in Mission, and this is what it looked like a couple of weeks ago. So we're opening up at the end of August, as Judith will say. I just wanted to show you a few pictures of our display suite, which we're very, very proud of. It opened a couple of weeks ago. We had it staged by a professional stager. And the only sort of fly in the ointment of our display suite, which has been very, very, a big hit in Mission, is that it's on the 4th floor and our elevators don't function. So everybody has to walk up to the 4th floor and back down again, but people are very willing to do it. So that's the living room, as you can see, and there's the kitchen, and there's the bedroom. It is a 904 square feet, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit that includes all the appliances and an underground parking spot. The price on that one is $244,900. So that's been kind of a challenge for us in Mission too, because most of the housing stock in Mission is quite old. So our building, even though it's built on a nonprofit basis, is new construction. So our prices are quite a lot higher than a lot of the old condos in Mission. So that's been a bit of a challenge, but nothing we couldn't overcome, right, Judith? So I did want to talk a little bit about Cedar Valley Manor Connect, because that is our version of a virtual retirement community. Residents of Cedar Valley Manor who need advice or a service or a product, just about anything, in fact, all they have to do is call one number for assistance on anything, really. At the other end of the phone, 24/7, will be expert and current advice to help them. A one-stop shop, and I think Better at Home is on the agenda somewhere today or tomorrow. And one of the desires expressed by all the people who responded to the Better at Home community research was they wanted a one-stop shop rather than being faced with the need to go all over Hell's Half Acre trying to solve their problem. And that's what we will have at Cedar Valley Manor. Cedar Valley Manor Connect will always be completely current with programs and activities that are already available in the community. Our desire is to complement, not to duplicate. And Better at Home is a good example of a complementary program. Mission Community Services, which offers a wide variety of activities and programs for seniors in Mission, will be located in our building for 2 hours every week. And Lifetime Learning, similarly, another community resource in Mission, is greatly looking forward to offering its activities and so on in our amenity area. This is Catherine Gardens in Vernon, which is the other project that we're actively working on now. It's being built adjacent to the Schubert Center in Vernon, which is a very big and very vibrant senior center. The Schubert Center and Catherine Gardens are right downtown, which is why they qualify for this walk score of 88, meaning a walker's paradise. Catherine Gardens is 56 units. 53 of them are life lease and 3 of them are rental for low-income households. Everybody would have liked to incorporate more than 3 units, but we just couldn't and still ensure the financial viability of the building as a whole. Other examples of life leases that create rental housing, there's one in Kamloops. They follow the model of when you move out, you share the capital appreciation. The society in Kamloops puts its share of the capital appreciation in a little pot, and when the pot is big enough, they buy back one of the life lease units, which they then rent at safer levels to renter households in Kamloops. In Naramata, which is the smallest life lease in BC, maybe the smallest life lease in Canada, it's 4 units. 3 are life lease and 1 is rental. And they created the rental unit by fundraising in the community. And as the board in Naramata always says, is that you can certainly identify the depth of support in your community for anything when you start asking people for money. So, I am almost at the end of my remarks. Why does it work so well? Why does life lease work so well? We've got, as we say, 3 critical planks in healthy aging. We have a physically accommodating building. We're creating a community of friends and neighbors, an end to social isolation is what I meant to say. As Margaret said earlier, social isolation is just as bad for your health as smoking 3 packages of cigarettes a day. And we have Cedar Valley Manor Connect, an affordable way to provide aging in place services for many seniors, not all, but many. And Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies made the point a couple of years ago that contrary to the long-held belief that people had to move from residence to residence to residence as their needs changed, we now increasingly recognize the elasticity of, must be an economist writing that report, elasticity of conventional housing in terms of its ability to accommodate a wider spectrum of older people by linking physically supportive residential housing with services. And that's one of our major marketing messages in Mission and in Vernon, the fact that most people will be able to live the rest of their lives very happily in Cedar Valley Manor and in Catherine Gardens. So, how do we get more life leases in BC? You can see from this slide that BC is really behind the life lease curve compared to our eastern neighbors, which is why we have to spend so much time explaining what life lease is all about and educating people. It was interesting that a few months ago we did a mail drop in Vernon, and the little mailer piece did not mention life lease housing at all. And one of the people who got the mail drop came into our presentation center a while later and said, "Why didn't you mention it was a life lease?" But of course she was from Manitoba. So events like this are great. I never, ever miss an opportunity to talk about life lease. So if any of you are out there are members of organizations who would like me to come and talk to you, I'm always happy to do that. The Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, CHRA, is putting on a webinar in the fall on life lease. And so I'm going to be on the panel as well as a nonprofit from Ontario to talk about Life-lease in a more national context. The Ontario government, in fact, published this little document, Life-lease Housing Resource Guide, just 2 months ago, in recognition of the increasing interest in life lease in Ontario. Although there's like 135 life leases in Ontario, so you can see there's like 13 in BC or something like that. So we're way behind. And that brings me to, so Judith is going to tell you about Cedar Valley Manor, and then Judith and I are going to talk together about some of these challenges after Judith's finished her remarks.
Thank you, Kate. Kate and her Terra Lumina team have been incredibly important to us in mission in terms of getting this project off the ground. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the organization is that I'm the president of, it's called the Mission Association for Seniors Housing. It was created in 1999 by 7 different organizations who realized that we would make things happen if we worked together, and we weren't going to make things happen if we remained competitive for limited resources. So the membership on our board is actually board members from other organizations. We are a group of boards coming together, which is a different dynamic than a collaborative of senior staff. It frees up people to not be so worried about issues related to their employment and more related to what we collectively can do in the community. And currently we're now 9 organizations that are together in mission. 2 of the societies that belong operate seniors housing. 1 is our Community Living Society. 1 is the Senior Center Society. There are 4 churches, the United Church, Presbyterian Church, Lutheran Church, and Mennonite Church, and the Community Services Society. As well, the municipality's been an ex officio member of our board, and the mayor has attended on a regular basis. So that has been an amazing connection. The key to success for us in getting any project done has been that we've had really strong joint board commitment to community development and to the cultivation of multiple community partnerships. We're a community of about 40,000 people, so we're small enough to pretty much know who the players are, but unless we're cooperating together, nothing happens because we are that small. It takes a lot of trust between the member organizations because the goal of sharing knowledge and sharing resources for a common goal at the same time reduces the influencer profile of one organization. So people have to put their egos aside. The success of MASH collectively was highlighted by the Chamber of Commerce awarding us the Excellence Award for the Nonprofit of the Year last year. So why did we as an organization end up choosing Life-lease? Our first joint project that MASH did was a 58-unit assisted living building with BC Housing and Fraser Health's involvement on land that was donated back to us from the hospital. 40 units of those are subsidized and 18 are private, but they're private for lower income seniors. And most of the lower income seniors in the private units are actually on the waiting list for a subsidized unit. We had to do significant fundraising for that project. We needed 10% equity before BC Housing and Fraser Health would do the project with us. And it opened in 2006. That was the first thing we collectively did together, and that was wonderful because what it did was it created a confidence amongst our member organizations, and one of them then stepped forward and donated 2 city lots to us for the next project. There was no provincial funding available for affordable seniors housing, so we had used Terra Housing with our Cedars project. We then reconnected with them in the Terra Lumina group to do a needs assessment to figure out what we could do for seniors housing now that we had some land we could use. Affordable rental housing was identified as a real need in the community, but we could not find a feasible way to go about that at that point in time. So we said, okay, let's look at Life-lease because it surfaced in our needs assessment as another alternative. We needed 1 more lot because 2 lots weren't big enough, so we used our resources to purchase the 3rd adjacent lot. We used the needs assessment to go forward in applying then for project development funds from CMHC, and with an architect rendering and with the involvement of Terra Lumina's support, we began to introduce Life-lease to mission Most people in Mission had never heard of it before. Because they were unfamiliar with it, it took a lot of effort and strategic connections, and having 9 organizations to help us make those connections was really important. We also had the municipality involved from the beginning, so they knew now what it was. They too had never heard of this before. We went to the commercial lenders and tried to find out what they would require of us, and initially they said that we would need at least 60% pre-sales in order to access financing. So we said, okay, we'll do that. So we embarked on it by setting up a presentation center and continuing to conduct face-to-face presentations in the community. But we reached 50% pre-sales, which in a 42-unit building is 21, and we hit a wall. We knew we needed construction to start in order to establish an end date, because people were reaching the point of saying, we really need to know when this is going to happen in order for us to commit. And even those that had committed at that point were saying, so when is this going to start? So we went back to the lenders, and Envision Credit Union agreed if we would increase our equity position, they would finance it on a 50% pre-sale basis. So we were able to do that, and we started construction in July 2013. So who have our customers been? They include buyers from the ages of 60 to late 80s, both singles and couples, and in one case, a mother with an older handicapped son. The reasons they indicate its appeal to them include simplifying their lives without having to become involved in strata politics. It addresses their feelings of isolation and loneliness living in their single-family home. It's freeing up capital for them to do other things because of being house-rich and cash-poor, downsizing while they're able to be in control of that, reducing their annual housing expenses, and realizing that from an estate planning perspective, this is very simple. Why would that be true? We have committed as an organization to a model of returning 95% of the purchase price to the individual or their estate within 4 months of their leaving the unit. I've literally said to people, you can write your will today. The release of the unit by MASH will be at a price we've committed to the municipality as well as our community. The price will be no more than 50% of any real estate increase in similar properties. So, for example, if the real estate market for apartment condos has gone up by 5%, our price would not go up by more than 2.5%, so half of the 5%. And we may choose not to increase it at all, depending on the market, wait list, the community, our financial viability. This is our way of increasing the affordability of the units over time, since affordable housing is our primary focus. We've also identified the need for rental housing, and as Kate said, there are some ways over time to gradually create some rental opportunities within the building. And as the people move in and become comfortable with themselves as a community, we believe that they'll then be able to look at how we can incorporate some rental units over time into the mix. This kind of project has not been without its challenges, and so Kate and I would like to just share a bit together about what those challenges have been and what we've done about it.
So we know this is a bit weird that we're sort of both up here side by side, but it seems like the best way of dealing with it. So I'm going to just say a couple of words about sort of more general issues associated with the challenge, and then Judith will talk about the Cedar Valley Manor specifics. So resources, that's always the big one. You need a lot of money to get a real estate project off the ground. And for nonprofits, it can be very difficult to find the money they need, very difficult. It's always helpful to own a piece of valuable land. So if you are a nonprofit and you own a piece of valuable land, you're in a very beneficial position. CMHC, again, has helped with seed funding and proposal development funding. But without land or another operating entity, such as the Mission Association for Seniors Housing has, it's very difficult to move forward. What we could really use in this province is a community-minded venture capitalist of some kind that could front-end the development costs and be repaid with modest interest when the project is completed. So if any of you know of any, give them my name, and expertise in financing real estate projects on your team is absolutely critical. It's a very complex area.
So as I mentioned, we needed at least 10% equity and 60% sales before the commercial lenders would provide financing. Usually this would represent land value in large part, but it also requires some cash resources, and one of the biggest cash resources we had to come up with was about $500,000 for the development cost charges we had to pay before we could get the development permit. And we actually had to borrow money from one of our other enterprises, which is the Cedars, in order to have that money available. We will repay the Cedars at a modest interest, so they're making some money on the project, but it was a real trick to try and figure out how to make that happen. The other thing, though, that's been very helpful is municipal support, and having the mayor involved from the beginning was critical. They agreed that it was an affordable housing project, so they did forgive the community amenity fee, which would have represented about another $200,000. The land had 3 old houses on it that needed to be demolished, and we had to deal with a whole lot of hazardous material stuff, but the municipality agreed to let us put what was remaining in the landfill for free. And there was a laneway adjacent to the project that had been called a street, but the city didn't like it as a street. It really wasn't wide enough for a street, so they decommissioned it and gave it back to us, which actually increased our land footprint and increased the value of the land that we own as a result. And the planning department was wonderful. They worked really closely with us. They knew we had never done a project like this before, and given the length of time it took, I'm certainly not going to be doing another one. And so we really needed their help to stick handle it, and we would have been months longer if they hadn't been involved.
You have to do another one, Judith. Pre-sales and deposits. 20-somethings, of course, are entirely used to pre-sales, but for older buyers, generally speaking, it's completely unheard of. There was an article in The Sun recently that some of you might have seen called "Older Homeowners Cash In for Condos." It quotes Bob Rennie, the condo king in Vancouver. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him, who points out that older buyers aren't an easy sell compared to first-time buyers or investors. He recommends going to a white spot and having coffee and pie with potential buyers, which is very good advice because pre-selling is a difficult challenge.
Mm-hmm. Without the pre-sales, you can't establish a construction start date nor an occupancy date. So this uncertainty for older adults is a real challenge. Most did not have the cash resources to put down a deposit, so they used a line of credit against the future sale of their home, and this is an unfamiliar process to many. Lots of our buyers have bought 1 or 2 homes in their entire lifetime. With advice from financial institutions, we decided to require 20% deposit. 10% initially when they first made the commitment, 7% at the building permit stage, and 3% at substantial completion. With that, they were prepared to finance us. Now that construction is underway, new purchasers who are arriving on our doorstep have to put 17% down because, of course, we're in construction now. And that can be quite intimidating, again, to people who have not been in the process of purchasing homes for a long time. However, we believe that a total of 10% would be more reasonable. However, the lenders will charge a higher interest rate for the construction loan if the deposits are only 10%, so there's a balancing act there.
Sales, I mean, most for-profit developers will spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on marketing a real estate project, and we didn't even have a fraction of that amount. So for a nonprofit, you really have to get creative and think of different ways of getting your message out. And, you know, I just cannot emphasize strongly enough the critical necessity of good marketing and sales skills. I've been self-employed most of my career, so you're always selling yourself in some respect. But the difference between that and selling some 75-year-old person a housing unit for $250,000 that isn't even built is a completely different kettle of fish. So over the past 2 years, I've become a disciple of every famous sales coach you can possibly imagine. And I have learned to embrace rejection because, as they say, it's nothing personal.
So the costs for marketing have been much higher than we or the consultants anticipated. Because there were 2 for-profit congregate seniors housing projects that have had significant vacancies in Mission, they've been paying weekly for full-page ads in the local papers. And it was really difficult to distinguish our ads and our projects from theirs when Life-lease wasn't a well-known concept, and they kept advertising as independent seniors housing. So it got quite confusing for people to figure out what it was that made us different. We're a fairly small community, but word of mouth took much longer to have an impact than we thought it would. Now that the project's under construction, there is much more buzz around town, but it took a physical presence to make that happen. The most effective marketing strategies have been face-to-face presentations with groups of seniors, a monthly newsletter mailed out to any visitor to the presentation center that agreed to receive it, a constantly updated website, and the development of a database of contacts that can be sent notices of specific events, news, etc. We know the ripple effect of them to all the people they know. We did not have the financial resources to build a display suite. However, in retrospect, we would recommend paying for the cost of a double-wide trailer, which can be set up to be a somewhat mock suite given its size, and several renderings of what the suites might look like. This would go a long way in getting the prospective space across, and the cost of such an initiative would be recovered in a shorter timeline for the marketing costs. What we have used as a presentation center is a single-wide trailer, and we've got some photos and renderings of what the building might look like, but much harder to conceive of the space involved when you can't lay out the square footage for people.
Yeah, so even though, as I mentioned earlier, our buyers and prospective buyers have to walk up floors, having the furnished suite available has been a tremendous benefit. So having that at the outset would have been good. Our second to last bullet point is long-term commitment, and my only sentence here is, without nonprofit organizations, where would we be?
The Nonprofit Society will continue to operate the building forever, so this is not a development project that once open is handed off to others. Instead, at the end of the construction, it's handed from the consultants and the builder to the nonprofit to operate. This includes ongoing responsibility for the Society's board to ensure it has staff who have expertise both in property management skills and in marketing skills. The local community will continue to monitor the project and the Society and how we function, so future projects are going to depend on our continuing success in this one. We are absolutely engaging with our buyers. We now have 25 units sold, and they know each other. They have been coming to events and selling the units for us. They are so excited to move in, but they have created that network amongst themselves and are already planning what they're going to be doing together in the building. And they see themselves as a unit with us, if there ever has to be a bad guy, being the bad guy, as opposed to any of them fighting with each other about what the rules should be, what the fees should be. All that kind of stuff is dealt with by us.
Last point, realtors. Some Life-lease projects, like Elam, have sell their units through realtors, and your realtors, and David's here, I've been with you since the beginning. In the case of, for Terra Lumina Life-lease, we use a legal structure so that either the directors or our employees can sell units legally without running afoul of the Real Estate Services Act. And that's because we didn't want to pay 3% sales commissions to realtors. That would have significantly increased the cost of our project. Realtors could still be involved, however, but Judith is going to tell you about our experience on that front in Mission.
We were really surprised that the real estate community was not supportive of this project in Mission. The building has 42 units, and each Life-lease purchaser has a home to sell, so we thought that would be dead easy. However, the purchase of the Life-lease unit doesn't involve a realtor. Because they would not have the potential of two transactions, they seem to have failed to present Cedar Valley Manor as an option to seniors who might approach them for advice regarding downsizing and alternatives available if they were to sell their homes. Kate and our team reached out to the realtors in our community to try and overcome this obstacle. We tried to engage them in a variety of ways, and they remain resistant. Therefore, the education of the public regarding life lease options has relied entirely on the nonprofit community. And the credibility of our organization, because the Cedars was up and operating, really helped in terms of us having that kind of credibility in the community.
Very interesting presentation. We now have some... We have some time for questions, and there are microphones, 2 microphones in the main aisle, and maybe I'll ask the first question, perhaps for both of you. What do you do for an operator when all the life leases, if you will, have moved out or been paid out, and now you're on to rent? Would you recommend that, or would you recommend continuing with life leases? And the second part of the question would be, what do you recommend for operators to do in terms of capital reserves for replacement of things like roofs, or if you have leaks, etc.?
Well, our life leases are life leases forever. So once the construction financing is paid off, then our life lease residents are life lease buyers. And in the case of Cedar Valley Manor, the Cedar Valley Manor Life Lease Housing Society will continue to be the owner of the building and the operator of it, the manager of it, if you like. In terms of the replacement reserve, the biggest amount in our monthly operating budget actually is a replacement reserve, so that if that whenever anything major needs replacing, like boilers or roofs or whatever, the replacement reserve fund will be adequate to cover that. Judith?
In terms of rental, in our project, one of the things that has attracted people to the building initially is that there are no rentals. We know that once the community is built internally, the idea of having a rental unit or even more than that will be acceptable to people because they'll understand how that will fit in. But initially, they wanted to have that sense of ownership. So we will work with them over time and identify what the right mix is, including what we know about the community's need at the same time. I can't conceive that we would ever be completely rental. I think a large portion of our units will continue to be a life lease model as a purchase in and departure, again, with the equity piece.
If I can just say one thing, Dan, the ability to retain capital, the ability to retain 95% of their capital in the case of Cedar Valley Manor is one of the major advantages of the life lease model that appeals to our buyers, that they aren't going down the black hole of rental, as people tend to say.
In terms of the price of the unit, did you do much consideration or debate around fixed price or market based in terms of what an individual gets?
Fixed price. What could you explain that?
Okay, essentially, if it costs $80,000 to build the unit, you sell it for $80,000 to them.
Well, that's basically what we're doing.
Okay, as opposed to a market-based.
Yes, it is cost-based. Sorry. Now, there are some examples of nonprofit sponsors in other places that sell at market as opposed to cost and use the difference at the outset to build other projects or whatever they want. But ours is a cost-based, yes.
And just to be clear, not all units are that expensive. We actually had three one-bedroom units, the cheapest of which was $169,900, and the cheapest two-bedroom, which is a little bit smaller, it's 870 square feet, was $199,000. So there's a range. The unit that Kate referenced is on the top floor, and we also have like first, second, third floor pricing too.
I wondered if you have pamphlets that describe what you've been talking about.
Right. So Gloria has just pointed out that notwithstanding my eloquent presentation, people don't understand what a life lease is. It does take a while to really grasp the principles of it. So basically, a life lease is a building that is owned by a nonprofit. In our case, the Mission Association for Seniors Housing. They own it. The people moving into the building pay to construct the building. And when they move out, they get 95% of their money back. So that's essentially how it works. Now, we don't have any actual pamphlets here today, but our PowerPoint presentation will be on the Friesen Center website in a few weeks, as Gloria said, and you can certainly get a hold of any of us at any time, and we'd be happy to talk more about it.
Can I ask one? In one of the places that you showed on the pictures, there was a health sort of side to the building. I'm just wondering if one were sick, is there anything that deals with that?
What we're building is a building that, if you looked at it, looks like an apartment building, and you would presume it's a condo, a strata condo, is what you would see visually. Mm. As Kate said, the cost of construction is what we're charging for people to purchase in. And then we're using Cedar Valley Manor Connect as the one call to the Cedars, where we provide assisted living services. And they will, between the services that we have available that we can extend from there, the Better at Home program, the regular home health programs, and others, bring the resources into people in their apartment.
Thank you.
No fee unless they would pay. Like, if you were going to pay for home support, if you were living in your own home, you'd pay for it here too. But we're not charging for that connection.
Hello, my name's Catherine Willett.
Okay, so Gloria's got one question that she thinks may be helpful. The life lease is 29 years, 364 days in length, or anything shorter. If it reaches the 30 years, we as a nonprofit society have agreed that we will renew that lease, and we will cost ourselves the property transfer tax if it kicks in at that point, because it's the same person. When that person leaves and a new person comes in, they again have a 29-year, 364-day lease. So it's not a declining lease over time. It's a 30-year minus a day lease for every new person that comes in. Our strata fees equivalent are averaging around $330 a month. That includes the property taxes, it includes the replacement reserve, and it includes the operating costs. People will pay their own utilities in their units, but we are paying for that strata fee pays for the utilities for the common areas. There is no gas into the individual units, it's electric.
My name's Catherine Willett. I work primarily with family caregivers, educating them on seniors' housing options. So I've really appreciated this. I do have to say I'm still a little bit confused, because we wouldn't be renters, but we're not exactly owners, but that's another thing. When you've mentioned buildings, when you mention size, you've always talked about 2 and 3 bedroom suites. And so I could see a 2-bedroom for an older couple, but are these buildings, do they also house anyone in a family, or are they just for seniors? And how come there's no studios and 1-bedrooms?
When we did our needs assessment in Mission, the strong feedback we had from people was they wanted 2-bedroom units. So we took a risk and built 3 1-bedroom units, and actually one of them still hasn't sold. The primary purchasers have been single people, but they've wanted the 2nd bedroom for a variety of reasons. Some of them want it as a den, as an officey space. Some of them want it so they can have their company, because we don't have a place in the building otherwise where a company could stay. Some of them have hobbies they'd like to set up there. We do have a large workshop area in the basement for tool kind of activities, but for hobbies that people can do in a suite, they could do that in the 2nd bedroom. So strong feedback from the community that 2 bedrooms was what would go.
Hi, excellent presentation. I've never heard of it before, which is kind of cool to hear it now. I can understand the trepidation of individuals that have worked their heinies off all their lives. They know that their earning power is basically finished, and then to put $250,000 or $300,000 out on something they can't touch. So, do you have such a thing as holding money in trust? So if it went forward, that they would be guaranteed that their money was safe?
Oh, yes, their money is entirely safe. The deposit structure is 10% when people bought originally, and then an additional 10% while the building is under construction. All those deposit funds are kept in trust with a law firm, so there is absolutely no risk to the deposits. If the building didn't proceed for whatever reason, then their money would be returned. So the deposit money is not at risk at all.
Okay, and that would help a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it would. And the other thing is, if it's, and it sounds like this has been going on for a while across Canada, I'm trying to understand why CMHC or someone else wouldn't underwrite it if it's, really. No, I'm serious. I'm not.
Well, I'm sure. I know you're serious, but it's sort of a sore spot. CMHC has underwritten the odd life lease from time to time. They did underwrite some of Elam's, but it's not an area that CMHC is really attracted to, if I can put it that way, Karen.
Interesting. Did I tell you I'm a politician?
No, you didn't mention it.
Maybe I'll be chatting to CMHC.
So we do have time for a few more questions, and I see somebody walking up from the back of the room.
Hello? Hi. That was excellent, thank you. Very interesting. I'm from Manitoba, so I understand completely what you're talking about. In fact, my father was a director of a large charity that built many of them. Or he's a lieutenant governor. But I'm interested in the way that you worked your model here is different from how we did it back there, and that there it was more of a rental model. You would pay a deposit, and say the market rent was $2,400, you get a modulated rent of $1,400, and essentially that was put aside in a set-aside fund. You'd receive a small interest rate on it, and then it wasn't even a matter of 4 months when you moved out. It was give 30 days notice and get your money back. Is it because we're in British Columbia and people are so used to ownership models?
No. In fact, the Manitoba model, as we call it, operates exclusively almost in Manitoba. And the rest of the provinces all operate more or less on the same approach we take in BC, that people pay 100% of the cost of the unit. The exceptions to that, interestingly enough, are the Good Samaritan life leases in Kelowna and in Vernon, and they operate on the Manitoba model. So people pay 30% of the price of the unit and then a higher monthly rent. And people, all the research that's been done in BC and in other provinces indicates that people prefer to pay the upfront amount and a low monthly rent rather than the other way around. And the other advantage of paying the 100% upfront is that they get 95% of all of that money back. Whereas if we use the Manitoba model, they get back 95% of the 30%, but none of the monthly rent.
Right.
So from a consumer perspective, consumers in BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan prefer the sort of 100% upfront model. But we do have the ability in our life leases to use the Manitoba model, but we go 50%, that people who don't have enough money to pay 100%, we can accommodate them, although nobody has ever wanted to yet.
And what do you see as the major obstacle to private developers engaging in this type of program?
The major obstacle is trust from consumers, and that is why the for-profit companies in Alberta have been successful, is because they are companies with decades of experience in the Calgary and Edmonton market. They're very well known and they're very trusted. So that is the primary issue. That's why nonprofits are the typical sponsors of life leases, is because consumers trust them.
Do you see in the future some kind I don't know if, I guess what I'm wondering is, can nonprofits address the future demand, and is there some role perhaps for private and non-partner partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. As Judith and I talked about, the lack of upfront resources can be extremely difficult for nonprofits to deal with. So a partnership between the right for-profit developer and a nonprofit could work really well.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
We have time for one more question. I see a gentleman in the back, and you know what? Well, maybe we'll do. If it's quick enough, we'll do one in the front as well. So maybe the gentleman in the back first.
Yeah, there's been some allusion earlier to stratas and their kind of the politics. I deal with a lot of complaints in my job of people living in stratas complaining about their neighbors and what can be done about it. And I explain to people that stratas are kind of like a government unto themselves, and it's really nothing I can help them with. I'm wondering about residents versus residents kind of problems in this project and what can be done, because it's not like a landlord who can evict a tenant or that kind of thing.
What we've identified already is that people have engaged with each other with more comfort because they know their friends and neighbors, and they will have a residence involvement, but they're not going to have to mitigate the issues between themselves. They've got us to be the mediator and ultimately an arbitrator if needs be, and they appreciate that. They don't have the energy to really at this point get involved in trying to sort out those issues between themselves in any way other than just what one would want to do generally with a neighbor. So they have actually appreciated the fact that they've got someone to turn to who can provide that mediation and arbitration should it be needed. You're right about the eviction, although because we do have a long-term lease, at the end of the day, rather than going to the Supreme Court of Canada to finally have somebody leave if they were being totally problematic in the community, we do have that kind of stick at the end of the day.
A final question from the front.
My question was mostly clarification. When you're talking about the low monthly rent after you've paid for the cost, is that the same as the maintenance fee, or is that two different?
Our maintenance fee, as Judith said, is about $330 a month. We were talking about the Manitoba model.
Yeah, no, but you said that with this one they were paying a low monthly rent. So
Right.
I'm thinking that really was what you were talking
No,
about.
that's not what I'm talking about. Yeah, no. Yes, the monthly fee. So what we found in terms of the Manitoba model is that people that we deal with prefer the 100% entrance fee at the front end, and then just the monthly operating fee after that. Yeah.
So because of time, we should end it, and I want to thank Kate and Judith very much for a presentation that was very enlightening and very informative. Thank you.